But thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Author Charles B. Fancher will discuss his new historical novel, Red Clay, in conversation with Pulitzer Prize-winning syndicated columnist, author, and professor Cynthia Tucker in this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. Charles B. Fancher is a writer and editor and a former senior corporate communications executive for the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Philadelphia Daily News, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. He has also worked as a journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Detroit Free Press, and WSM-TV, as well as a publicist for the American Television Network. Charles was previously a member of the School of Communications faculty at Howard University and the adjunct faculty at Temple University. He lives in Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains, and Red Clay is his first novel. Red Clay is an astounding multi-generational saga, chronicles the interwoven lives of an enslaved Black family and their white owners as the Civil War ends and Reconstruction begins. And a little bit about Cynthia Tucker, who needs no introduction, but Cynthia Tucker is the co-author of The Southernization of America, A Story of Democracy and the Balance, which won the Pulitzer Prize, she won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary back in 2007. Cynthia spent most of her career in journalism, having worked for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution as editorial page editor and a Washington-based political columnist. She has also been featured as a political commentator on TV and radio. Her work as a journalist has been celebrated by the National Association of Black Journalists, who inducted her into its Hall of Fame, Harvard University, and the Alabama Humanities Foundation. She spent 3 years as a visiting professor at the University of Georgia's Grady College of Journalism and is currently the journalist in residence at the University of South Alabama. All right, hopefully I got most of that right. Okay, so folks, let's give Cynthia and Charles a big virtual round of applause for being here tonight. And Cynthia, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert. First, Charles, I want to say how honored I am that you asked me to blurb Red Clay. Being asked to blurb a friend's novel is fraught because there's always the possibility that the person who's supposed to write the blurb won't like the book very much. But you made it very easy for me. Red Clay is a terrific read, and I am thrilled that you asked me to write a blurb. So I have a question for you. I know that you have ancestral roots in Alabama. What was the inspiration for this novel?
Well, this novel actually began as an attempt to write narrative nonfiction. My mother, who was in her 90s at the time, while we were visiting her, started telling me stories about her grandfather, her great-grandfather, or my great-grandfather. I had heard some of them before, but she was really into it on this particular occasion. And I think she was surprising herself by how intriguing some of those little snippets and anecdotes were. And she said, you should write a book. He was an interesting character. And I let that marinate for quite a while before I did anything with it. But she sent me some handwritten notes, just random things that she remembered about him. And that set me on the path for doing some serious research. But as is often the case, when you're looking into African-American families, there are just so many stone walls that you hit. And there came a point at which I thought, I'm just not going to be able to do this in the way that I think it should be done. But luckily for me, I had another realization at the same time. And that was that this character, and he was a character for me because I had never met him. He died 6 years before I was born, had become very real. And I actually did have connections with him. I had been in the house that he had built with his own hands. His daughter, my grandmother, was someone who had taken care of me and of whom I now have very fond memories. And as I thought about it, he had become so real. And some of the issues that were present persuaded me that there was a story I could tell that would be much more true in many ways as a work of fiction, as a novel. And that set me on a whole new path. And that was how it came to be.
Well, it sounds though as if your great-grandfather, though, was very much a role model because for the character of Felix Parker, because you talked about being in the house that he had built with his own hands. And in the novel, Felix Parker is a carpenter, a very good one. And I want to talk, I want you to talk about that a bit, because one of the things that I found unusual about your novel is that you write about a Black family who comes out of slavery and manages to build a good life for themselves. That story is rarely told. So was it because your family was such an inspiration, or did you also want to highlight that part of our history?
That's a very good question, because I think both things are true. It has always been, I think, important to me that the story of Black families that emerged from enslavement and who were able to, in a generation, build some wealth, establish businesses, enter the professions, gain educations, and become really fully formed participants in what's often described as the American dream. And it happened very quickly. And that story, I think, is often not told, or at least not told to the extent that it is part of the narrative when we discuss the country. And for me, it became possible and that was the truth that I was talking about, that I wanted to be able to tell, because Felix did acquire skills as a carpenter. And as he developed them, he was able to develop a business that enabled him to build a home, to become a sought-after artisan. He made a life and became a real participant in that community. So yes, both things are true. There's the story of freedmen who managed to overcome extraordinary odds. And in my case, I was able to personify it through telling the story of my great-grandfather.
There are also other episodes, other events in the book, which again we don't hear, which I think do tell a larger truth, but don't get told very much. For example, Felix's mother, as an enslaved woman, she and a friend of hers kill an overseer who is about to attack her friend and get away with it. Why was that incident important to you? Why did you think you wanted that in your narrative?
Well, yeah, I think that had to be there for a couple of reasons. One is that so often the vision of enslaved African Americans is one of people who are just so beaten down that they don't have any wherewithal to stand up for themselves. And that was not entirely the case. Certainly it was true for many, maybe even most, but there were people who were willing to take a stand, to do what they had to do to survive, to prosper, to have a sense of themselves as human beings. And in this particular instance, the one to which you refer, this was not a planned moment, planned by the characters. It was not planned by the characters. It was not a premeditated moment, but it was symbolic of all of the pent up emotion, of all of the anger, the hurt that poured out in that one moment. And that provided a turning point, a pivot in the narrative in the book.
Let's talk about the remarkable evolution of Addie Parker, Adelaide Parker. And let me just say, for those who haven't read the book yet, the Black characters, the Black family and the white family have the same last name, Parker. That is not at all unusual in the history of Southern American life, because when enslaved people were freed, they generally didn't have last names, and they often took the last names of the families that had owned them. So Felix Parker is a Black man, but Adelaide Parker is a white woman who had been a member of the family that had owned the Black Parkers. She has a remarkable evolution in the book. Talk about that a little bit, if you will.
Well, one of the enduring characteristics of Southern life has been the physical proximity of whites and Blacks to each other. As separate as they are in so many ways, their institutions, the churches, the schools, commercial establishments, and so on, they were always living right next to each other in many ways. And so they knew each other. And that has its roots, certainly, in the plantation society in which you have people, in some cases, in the case of some house slaves, living under the same roof, while others, the field hands, were out in cabins. So the idea that they would know each other and yet not know each other at the same time was part of what drove that relationship. And in the book, Adelaide Parker, who, when we meet her in the first chapter, is an old woman. She's in her late 80s, as is Felix, whose funeral she comes to. And she comes to the funeral not just to pay tribute to him, but because she has questions. She wants, it has occurred to her over the course of a long life in which the arc of her story and the arc of Felix have occasionally intertwined, and in significant ways, that she really doesn't want to die without knowing the whole story of who this man was, someone that she had known from the time that she was 9 years old and Felix was 7 or 8. And as divergent as their lives had become, they also had a connection that could not be broken. And when she sits down, and I'm not giving anything away by telling you this, for a long conversation with Felix's granddaughter, these two women start telling the story of the man that they each knew. And by the time they're done, the fragments have become whole. And we have a sense of who he was. And in doing so, we also have a greater sense of who all the other men like him were and what made them so remarkable.
Isn't it true, though, that a Black family like the Parkers, particularly Felix's parents, would have known the white family who owned him and his wife and children very well? Wasn't it in their interest to know the white slave owners, even if the white slave owners knew very little about them, actually?
Yeah, well, that's one of those things that hasn't changed. It has certainly, there's slavery's gone, but it has always been the case, I think, for Black Americans, and I think probably for non-white Americans of all ethnicities. And I could even stretch it a little further and say, and move away from race and suggest that women have had to know men better than men know women. And getting back to what we're really talking about, Black people have had to know the whites with whom they interact better than in the other direction. It is a matter of survival. It is not something, that, one wakes up in the morning and thinks, oh my God, I've got another day of having to, it's not that at all. People live lives that are full of joy, but it is always the case that there is that burden of knowing that falls more heavily on the shoulders of those who are not white.
It's the power dynamic.
Yes.
It's the difference in power. One of the things, there are so many things that are remarkable about Red Clay. As a writer, I was especially drawn to the vivid detail, what the land would have looked like, what the inside of the slave owner's house would have looked like. How did you research the details of what the land and the people would have been like back then?
Well, I knew the land very well. I was born in southern Alabama. I was born in Selma, in fact, and we lived not far from Selma. And so until I was 8 years old, woke up every morning with red clay, that soil, outside. Some of the homes of people that I knew, in fact, there was one down the road from the house that Felix built, where my grandmother lived and where I often spent time. That was not much more than an old plantation shack. So, it was imprinted on me. And I was able, when I went back to visit, it was all very familiar. It just came back in a flood of memories and just walking on that land and breathing that air and hearing people talk. It made it easy to do. When I was back here in Pennsylvania and sitting at that computer behind me, I could summon it up. I knew what it smelled like. I knew what it looked like. And I just let it flow.
Well, it flows beautifully. You have said that you think the book is about family. It is certainly that. You have also said it's about redemption. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it is about redemption because, especially for Adelaide, the old white woman that we meet, but who we also live with through most of the book,
Mm-hmm.
As she is retelling her story, we go back and we get to meet her as a little girl, and we see her as a young woman. We see her as a more mature woman who has to make some very hard choices at critical moments in her life. And over the course of that lifetime, there evolves a character who develops a keen sense of self-awareness.
Mm.
By the time she is an old woman, she knows herself in ways that many people never know themselves. And it's because of that self-awareness that she is able to achieve redemption for things that she is not proud of and things that she realizes were good in her and that she didn't appreciate at the time. There are other characters as well, notably her brother, who goes in the opposite direction. But she figures it out and she is redeemed. Similarly, even Felix has moments in which he becomes someone, he's not pure gold.
True. He's not a perfect man.
He is not. And he finds his way back and achieves his own form of redemption.
One of the many remarkable things about the book is that I think you show very clearly that race shadows and haunts and oppresses not just the Black characters in the book, but the white characters as well. I think that is something that white America hasn't acknowledged enough, hasn't struggled with enough, that if we could liberate ourselves from our long-standing notions about race and ethnicity, we would all be liberated. Because you talk about Adelaide and her brother, and it is very clear that they are haunted and oppressed by race in the case of the brother, throughout his life, and in the case of Adelaide, probably throughout hers as well.
Yeah, it's a terrible burden. It really is. And it's hard to make, and I wouldn't even try to make blanket statements about everybody in a group. That it just wouldn't be productive. But certainly, it's clear that there are people, both white and Black, who find themselves trapped by their own perceptions of the other. And it's really hard when you live in a multicultural society, and every day you interact with people who you have to keep reminding yourself are people that you don't like, and who are somehow inferior to you. That's a really heavy thing to have around your shoulders, around your neck every day. And it's only when people are able to let go of that and to treat each other as human beings, that life becomes a whole lot easier, a lot more fun, and easier to bear.
Booker T. Washington is alleged to have said that you can't keep a man down in a ditch unless you stay down there with him. Wiser words have never been spoken.
Yeah, I've heard that word, and just to to mention, in his introduction of you, Robert mentioned the book that you co-wrote with
Fry
Gilliard,
mm-hmm.
and that's the Southernization of America, and that is one of the themes that runs all the way through it. Yours is a nonfiction work and an extraordinary work that traces the through line of in America from its beginning to where we are now, of mistakes that we keep making over and over and over again. All the way back to pre-Civil War and the Reconstruction era, where my narrative is set, where my novel is set, and how we keep doing it again and again and again. And you do that just so brilliantly. And it, that was recognition of that was something that I was thinking about, that telling the story of a family making its way through what was really a very exciting moment in history of Reconstruction, when it really seemed like we were going to figure it out, only to have everything come crashing down again with the arrival of Jim Crow.
I now find for the book, actually, for Southernization, I read a lot more about Reconstruction than I ever had before. Your book, Felix is an adult as Reconstruction is starting. And like so many freedmen and women, he and his family had the highest hopes for what the nation, particularly the South, would become. And the fact of the matter is that history tells us that Reconstruction was a good period for everybody.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bad period for whites. Lincoln, of course, forgave the Confederates as long as you would take an oath of loyalty to the United States. You got all your citizenship rights back. And the freedmen who were elected to public office had really believed in equality for everybody. They weren't holding grudges. They wanted to see this American dream come true for everyone. That is not what happened. So I have a question for you about our current political moment. I often wonder if we are not now entering another post-Reconstruction period, because the post-Reconstruction period, as your book eloquently sets out, certainly there were Black people, Black families who not only survived but thrived, but there were a lot of obstacles thrown up in their paths as Jim Crow settled in over the nation. We had this remarkable resurgence of equal rights, the civil rights movement, forward to, in my view, about 2008, 2012. And then it seems to me the pendulum might be swinging in the other direction. What do you think?
I think there's no question that the pendulum is swinging back in the other direction. Just in the last couple of weeks, We've certainly seen, what were well established practices and norms in society be challenged, and not only challenged, but attempts to change the actual legal underpinning of all that has been gained. I tend to be optimistic, and I think that I don't think that we're headed for another actual Jim Crow period, but I do think that we are going to have some really rocky times ahead, and that there's a good chance that my optimistic view could be overturned. When you've probably heard people that talk about making contingency plans in case that they have to get away quickly. And who would have thought a couple of years ago that would even be part of the conversation? And yet, people are having those talks.
Indeed. Not only have I heard people I know talk about making contingency plans, I have a teenager, and I'm thinking about the prospect of the nation in which she will come of age. So I am thinking, do I need to make contingency plans on her behalf? On the other hand, I have so many friends and acquaintances, as I am sure you do as well, who note that we helped build this country. Just as your ancestors did in real life, your actual ancestors, just as Felix Parker and his family did in the novel. And why should we leave?
Exactly right.
And so one part of what I think I weigh in the balance, and I'm sure you and others we know do, is all of those contributions that our ancestors made. You come from a family who in real life managed to not just survive through Jim Crow, but to thrive in the Deep South. So is that part of what your optimism is based on?
It is actually. Um, I can remember as a little boy, my parents and their friends talking. It seemed like every adult conversation I heard had something to do with race, and how to survive, how to get around this problem or that problem. They found a way, and they were starting from a place that was a little farther behind the line,
Yes.
than where I started. So, if they could do it, I could do it.
It is so interesting that you say that, because I was in small town Alabama. Monroeville is smaller than Selma. And I too remember how many conversations my parents and their friends had about some obstacle related to race and how to get around it. And I also remember two other things that my parents were adamant about and left me with. I would have to drag stories out of my parents about the things that they had experienced. And I asked my mother once when I was college age, why didn't you tell us more of the sort of oppression that you encountered? Why didn't we hear more of those stories? And she said, I didn't want my children to grow up bitter and resentful. Because she said, and this is the other thing that has stuck with me, I knew that your lives would be better. And that is what they work for, and that is what your parents work for, and that is what the fictional Felix Parker was working for his family. I mean, whatever else is may be true about him, he was a good businessman and a good provider.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that I that might well have been a conversation that I had with my parents. Um, yeah, they just didn't want to talk about it with me because they didn't want my vision of the future to be tainted by any thoughts of what I couldn't do.
Exactly.
And when I think back to the sacrifices that they made to climb out of where they started, and the platform that they were able to pass on to me and to my brother and my sister, it's pretty remarkable.
Indeed. Look at what you have done in your lifetime. I have one more.
And you.
Well, thank you. I have one more question for you. I'm assuming that your mother is no longer with us.
Oh no. Actually, we lost my father a couple in 2020. He was 2 weeks shy of his 100th birthday.
Wow.
But my mother will be celebrating her 101st birthday
Amazing.
in July.
And has she read Red Clay, or
she read an early version of it and seemed to like it.
Excellent.
And my father also had a chance to read a very early draft.
Oh, your dad had a chance to read some of it.
Very early draft of it. And I think he kind of was maybe a little proud of it.
Well, that is great. I am so happy that both of them got to see at least some of the book, early drafts. And that must please you as much as any reviewer who liked the book, to know that they thought well of it.
Well, it does. And in fact, I got an email from her today. She said, your sister ordered a copy of it for me, so I'm going to be reading it.
Well, my mother will be 98 in March, and she is a fan of historical fiction of certain periods, including the Civil War years and the Reconstruction period. And as soon as I finished the pre-publication copy of Red Clay that you sent me, I said, Mom, I think you'll like this book. And she has read it twice. She really enjoyed it.
Well, that's high praise. That's high praise. Actually, one of the things that I mean, this is early, but one of the things that I've been very happy about is that people who have read advanced copies and earlier drafts across a pretty broad spectrum of people, racially and in terms of age and gender, and so far, everyone seems to have found something in it that appealed to them. So I have my fingers crossed, as they say, and we'll see.
I'm going to throw one more question at you. This one is overtly political. Do you think you'll end up on any please ban this book list?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. I am hopeful that that will not be the case. But, if it did, it would not surprise me, because there are some tough themes in it, alongside things that I think everybody could agree on. So we'll see.
Well, what I would say to that is if it does end up with somebody trying to ban it and it gets a little attention, that only helps book sales.
Well, I will consider myself to be in good company, given the list, the people who are
Exactly.
on the banned book list.
Exactly. I am sure we have audience questions and comments by this time. So I'm going to throw to Robert, who is going to pitch some of those back to you, Charles.
Okay.
So Cynthia, Charles, wonderful conversation as expected. And folks, as Cynthia said, if you have any questions, please get them into the Q&A. Now's the time. So Charles, we already have 4. The first comes from Philomena. Apologizes for any mispronunciations. She looks forward to reading your novel. She thanks you for being here tonight. She asks, and really this is for both of you, could you talk about how easy or difficult it was to go from journalism and communications to writing novels? Was it freeing and easier, or was it more challenging than you expected? Can you talk about ideas or writers or books that helped you make the transition? Charles, what are your thoughts?
Well, I found it to be freeing, but I did not run away from my journalistic roots to write it. It was very important to me that the backdrop against which these fictional characters were playing out was historically accurate, that events and places were absolutely accurate. But it was freeing to be able to create characters who could interact and tell the story that I wanted to tell.
Now, Cynthia, your book was nonfiction, but
my book was nonfiction, and quite frankly, very easy because it was so much like journalism. I was writing, my colleague and I, my co-author and I, were writing about newsworthy events over the course of the nation's history. And so that was pretty easy. Let me say that one of the problems that Black writers would run into writing a family-based historical novel is just the one that Charles mentioned. That if I were to try to write a nonfiction narrative about my own family and my family history is a little like the Parkers in the novel, in that my family managed to do okay post-Reconstruction and through Jim Crow. But much of what I know about my own family is oral history. There are very few records that back up the kinds of stories that I have been told. There are a few, but not many. And so I can understand why Charles made the choice of transitioning to fiction to tell the story.
Yeah.
So that actually, Charles, that answer from Cynthia dovetails into our next question. So the follow-up question, what did you learn about your family history that made you see that a fictional work was a better idea than nonfiction?
Well, it was not what I learned about the family so much as what I was unable to learn. For example, the real Felix was in fact a boy on a plantation in southern Alabama. The real plantation owner, and this is according to just family anecdotes, the real plantation owner did in fact have a daughter who was only slightly older than Felix. And according to the story, the anecdotes, she gave him a hard time and was the source of some very bitter memories for him when they were both children. Now, that part is true. But try as I might, I was never able to find that plantation.
Mm.
The name of the plantation in the book is Rhodes End, which is a symbolic name. The family name Parker is not a real family name in my case, although some of the first names of characters are real first names of people in my family. So, but those little bits, those anecdotes, gave me the kernels that I needed to grow the story and to put these fictional characters against the backdrop of an accurate backdrop. And they also provided me with an opportunity to let them grow and develop like real people.
So we have someone noting that there's a very good review of the book in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And I did want to point out that the book has received some great reviews from some of the library journals. Let's see here. Book List says, and I'm not going to read them all verbatim, but Book List, I'll read a couple of lines. Keenly aware of the intersections among race, class, gender, and cultural heritage, Red Clay is notable for its diverse portrayal of Black Americans before and during Reconstruction. It's a story of surprising allyship, painful secrets, and momentous transformations. And Publishers Weekly says that it was an immersive debut novel, plenty for historical fiction fans to love. And so I guess my question would be, given all that, is how, I know it's only been out for less than 48 hours, but what's the initial reaction been from folks reading the book?
Well, it's been great. People have, and I can't decide whether I'm more happy or more relieved to find that to be the case. But so, I had an email just shortly before we started this program tonight from a buddy of mine down in Florida who said, my book arrived today. I've already started reading it and I'm having trouble putting it down. So I love that.
That was my experience with it as well. And I just want to say one more time, because this was certainly important to me as a reader who grew up in the Deep South, and I'm also African American. It was important to me that this particular book, there are so many novels about the dire struggles that so many freedmen encountered after slavery ended, and so many families where a patriarch was lynched, and those are all true. That in the sense that they are representative of actual history. But I love the fact that this was about a family who thrived despite all those obstacles. So I want to say that again.
Yeah, no, excellent. Denise in the chat notes that Goodreads has a lot of great reviews of the book. I think the Goodread rating is 4.31, which is very impressive for a debut author, you know. That's 4.3 out of 5, folks. Anything over 4.0 is worth your time to read. All right, so let's go to another question. Oh, I'm sorry. So Denise did have a question as well. She's curious about the book cover, specifically the blank faces. So we do see the red clay on the background, but then we see some folks and their faces are blank. What were you trying to, and I know you probably didn't illustrate the cover, Charles, but what were you going for there?
Well, it's true. I did not design it, but I was given a chance to see it and to have input as it was being created. And I think I felt as if the blank faces were a way of representing all of the characters who fall into the categories that we're dealing with, rather than to have it focus on one particular face. I guess what I'm really trying to say is that they needed to represent many people as opposed to specific characters. And I think the blank faces, the abstract quality of that, makes that possible.
So this question will be for both of you. This comes from Amanda. When will African-American citizens in the South be able to have more of an influence in national elections? Is this all an issue of voter suppression? Any thoughts on Amanda's question there?
Why don't you go first, Cynthia?
Well, I think that voter suppression is certainly an issue. My co-author and I talk about it in the Southernization of America. The South, if you speak of the South in particular, there are certain institutional barriers that have been actually standing since post-Reconstruction. The Constitution of Alabama, for example, dates to 1901, and it was specifically written to enshrine white supremacy. And so one of the things that it does is guarantee that basically the state will always have a very low property tax rate. If there are always going to be very low property taxes, that means there won't be a lot of social services. Educational quality won't be very high. That dates back to Reconstruction, and that certainly has influence over the power that African American citizens of Alabama will have. Most of the states that restrict voting rights for people who are former felons, who come out of prison, who pay their dues and still can't vote, most of those states are Southern states. I don't think that's a coincidence. So I think we probably have a ways to go before we can break down all of the institutional barriers that were put in place to ensure inequality.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I would not differ from Cynthia's assessment in any significant way, and I think it's been that way for a long time. When I was doing research for Red Clay, one of the things that I came across in some old files that my mother had, and I think she had forgotten that she had it, was the voter registration card that Felix had, dated 1905.
Wow.
And it was an extraordinary thing for him in South Alabama to be a registered voter. He was not unique. There were others, but they were rare. And so that's a really prized possession. And of course, I'm sure all the people in online here tonight don't have to be told about all of the battles that were fought over the right to vote that continued right up until well into the 1960s. We had to have a Voter Registration Act. And that right to vote remains one of the most critical issues in which way our society goes in the future. And there are active efforts to restrict that right.
Charles, I'm going to cut it close, but I'm going to ask you one more question. So in 30 to 60 seconds, Mary wants to know, and this might be a good question to end on, I think it ties things together nicely. Mary asks, can you discuss the significance of the title, please?
Red clay. It is both literal and figurative. It is red for the red soil in that part of the world. It is literally red clay. When I would visit my grandmother's house and play outside, I'd come in with my clothes stained with it. And it is also red symbolically of the blood that was spilled in that part of the world into that soil in war, but also in lynchings and in the torturing of runaway slaves who were captured. So red clay, red for many reasons.
So Charles, Cynthia, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. Final question, Charles and Cynthia, where can folks go online to learn more about you and your works? Have we completely abandoned social media at this point, or where can folks find you?
Well, I've recently opened a Blue Sky account. I have a somewhat dormant Twitter, or now X, account, and I'm on Facebook, and I have an author website that doesn't have a whole lot of content right now. I'm still building it, but it's at charlesbfancher.com.
And Cynthia?
I have a dormant website with my columns that I am about to reactivate, is cynthiatucker.com. Very simple. I abandoned Twitter. I am on now X. I am on Facebook. And I am going to try out Blue Sky. I haven't yet, but so many friends and acquaintances have an account. I'm going to check it out.
Excellent. So folks, let's give Charles and Cynthia a big virtual round of applause. For those watching live, look for an email from me in about 60 minutes or so with a link to this recording, as well as a link to Wellesley Books to purchase a copy of Red Clay. And again, for those watching live, please take the 60-second feedback survey when you exit the Zoom. Charles, any last words before we wrap it up?
Oh, no, just I'm just thrilled to have had an opportunity to speak to you tonight. And Cynthia, thank you for being a great conversation partner. And I hope you all go out and buy Red Clay.
Here you go. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Cynthia. I hope everyone has a great rest of their night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.